I'm happy to opine on this.
No shit.
This
Oh, oh no, what are you doing to me? Oh no. Wait till you see what I've been given here.
only matters because today we segregate nearly all sports by gender.
That is an amazing... I did not see that coming. That is an amazing opinion to have. Thank you, Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's the only reason this matters? Oh my god.
What is unresolved here is, what do you do with sports? It's unresolved.
That's such an amazing... It makes me... I don't really often experience envy. But I'm a little envious of Neil deGrasse Tyson's, just like the smoothness with which you can go through life of thinking that this is a question about how to, like Castor Semenya, and is that's the only reason this matters. Okay.
And this seems to me absolutely ascientific, that if we're actually going to have a discussion about gender and sex, that should be based in data, which suggests that mammals are in fact binary in terms of their sex, unless you have intersex birth defects typically, or genetic defect.
So it's even the question whether sex itself is something that has a binary kind of feature to it. And you can see that he kind of concedes. He's like, unless there's something that's intersex, but the rhetorical move that he makes is to be like, it's binary except for this exception, but this exception is ridiculous. He kind of discounts the exception as not being worthy of consideration, and it's just some kind of weird thing. And this is often where, like, traditionally the idea of the defect or the idea of the abnormal gets kind of classed as the exception that needs not be considered. It's an exception that does not disrupt the conceptual categories that we have. So many people who work on something like intellectual history, well, you see this as a common pattern. Well, they'd be like, well, there are the monsters. And monsters were really what people who had defects were once called. They were things they were portents of what would come, right? They weren't really fully in the category of being human. So they had kind of meaning or significance, but not for the conceptual category that they were excluded from. They didn't disrupt our ideas about what made someone human, and therefore they weren't considered that way. In the same way, Ben Shapiro is kind of taking his taxonomy. He's like, look, this is a binary taxonomy. So any evidence that it's not binary is already excluded prima facie. That seems like a logical fallacy to me, but
people and just the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue
what a
advantage.
weird obsession.
So you just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are, and so you compete based on your hormones. I mean, this is thought I had. I mean, I don't know.
It's very weird to think that, like, what we're watching in sports is people competing on the basis of equal hormonal levels. Like, what a bizarre place to get to as the idea of what's commonsensical. I mean, just so strange. So strange. The idea of, like, the contest being equal because everyone needs to be equalized in terms of their bodily capacity is an impossibility, but it's also an absurdity. Isn't the kind of differences between bodies partly what athletic contest celebrates? Seems strange to me to try to, like, equalizing it would be like what is how you respect athletics. That seems weird.
You talk in your book about the education of children and teaching children about science. And right now, children are being taught about the quote-unquote gender spectrum, which is not scientifically based. That is a theory-based idea.
No, wait, hold on. People express themselves on a spectrum. So you learn that.
That's a social point, not a scientific point.
It's
meaning we express ourselves
hold on.
Based in different languages. Is that something you teach in science class, or is that something that you teach when you're teaching language?
So
the question is, what is the relationship of that to biology? Meaning that the argument is made that trans women are women, for example. And what that seems to mean is that trans women are identical to women. Now, if people want to say trans women are not biological women, obviously that is the case. But people don't seem to want to say that. Although that is obviously scientifically true. Trans women are not biological women. Biological women are biological women.
Is woman a biological term? Is woman a term that exists either exclusively or even especially in biology? It seems weird to me. I don't think I've ever heard any biologist that I know, and I do actually know some people who study the philosophy of biology, and I know some people who do biology. You don't refer to a woman ape or a woman cell. So maybe it is a language question after all.
I care what is objectively true in the world as a scientist. But let me not say even as a scientist. I just simply care what is objectively true. And science happens to be a pretty potent path to invoke, to find out what is true. And so if people express themselves on a gender spectrum, and that is an actual thing in an actual society, if we have not fully explained that scientifically, that's an interesting frontier to study. It's the purview of the social sciences. I don't care.
Yeah, it's like it has to be social science for it to be valuable. It has to have the word science in it for it to be valuable, or to be studyable, or to have inquiry into it. And also, like, the inquiry has to like happen by people who are scientists rather than like the people who are experiencing it. Their expression of what they're experiencing doesn't have any value for the inquiry, it seems like here.
We don't trust. I'm interpreting here. I think we as a society don't trust that people in charge in a free country won't try to legislate something that will constrict people's freedoms in the face of that information. I think that's the fear.
Well, isn't that...
It's a fear.
I mean, and isn't...
Couldn't it also be that scientific research itself is also motivated and part of the historical context that it finds itself in? I think that's the thing that's difficult to imagine for this particular group of people. Because if you assume that things that are not universally true are not true, then science's truth can't be based on its historical context. That science is not a kind of activity or practice. It is a kind of declaration of evidence and truth that is universally applicable at all times and all places. And because of that, you get this kind of really distorted view of science, that it stands apart from the society that it finds itself in. And it clearly doesn't. And so that any kind of reaction to what science says or produces from other people is like seen as anti-scientific or seen as like being a taboo rather than just a reaction. In the Commedia dell'arte, there was a character named Pantalone. And Pantalone is like presented as, he's presented as like a fake doctor. So he speaks in this, like a lot of the comic force of, there are many versions of his role. But a lot of the comic force of it is that he speaks in like bad Latin mixed with kind of like popular speech. But it's bad enough to the point that someone who has no Latin can recognize that it's bad Latin. It kind of lets you in on the joke. So Pantalone is this kind of guy who going around, he's a quack. I mean, you could say that all of medicine at the time was quackery, right? But this is a guy who's kind of self-consciously that. But his kind of brilliance is to understand how other people who have adopted a view of the medicine of their time as being serious can be persuaded and cajoled by even the appearance of the kind of language associated with that discourse. I think this is the same kind of thing that, like, these are two pantalones. That these are not, I mean, I guess Neil deGrasse Tyson was like a practicing scientist at one point in his life. But just because someone's a practicing scientist, like, do they speak for science with a capital S? Like, did they speak for this monolithic idea of what is going on? I think what it's more like is they kind of know how to speak to people who are very persuaded by the kinds of discourse they associate with science. And they find that powerful. And so if you speak in that way, they're like, oh, okay, well, you must be trustworthy. But there's all of the kind of groundlings who hear that, the ridiculousness of that are just laughing their asses off. Which one are you?
My general take on all of this stuff, from climate change to gender dysphoria, to all of these issues, is bring out the science and then let's hash it out. I think that the problem I'm seeing on a lot of sides
what is your motivation?
Bring out the science.
Why does that matter?
It matters because you get political power.
That's my favorite polka.
Creating legislation.
Bring out all the science and let's hash it out.
I'm saying
bring out
all the science and the politicians hash it out. The history of that exercise.
Everybody styles themselves as a champion of free speech. I mean, almost all of these public figures do, including Neil deGrasse Tyson. Freedom is just like a topos. Or it's one of these like rhetorical topoi that are super, super loaded with people's impressions of what that means. And you don't have to be a philosopher. You don't have to be a legal theorist. You don't have to be, somebody who has like gone to war to know what freedom means. The thing is, do you know what freedom means to somebody else? I don't think that's the part that's a little bit harder, of knowing what freedom means to somebody else. And you can go to the dictionary, you can go to John Stuart Mill, you can go to any kind of authority that you want to cite on freedom, but like the meaning of freedom is an open question. What we find should have no consequence. Good luck. Good luck. I mean, it's very interesting to hear Neil deGrasse Tyson say that, because he's like, his whole shtick is to go around and kind of like prop up, being like, science is the path to freedom, to liberation in all cases. But what if science discovers something that would conflict with people's rights? Not with the truth, but with what is just. Interesting question to dwell upon.
People who want rights don't get the rights from the Constitution. This is a daily